They thought they could erase a lifetime of service with a single piece of paper, but loyalty still matters in this country. For 5 decades, Henry Collins Farm had been more than just land. It was a crucial training ground for military pilots. Now, corporate developers were set on taking it away. But when Henry put up one final sign, it caught the eye of someone powerful. And within just 24 hours, everything changed in a way no one expected. Today, I've got an incredible story for you. Let's jump right in. Henry Collins, 72, had spent his entire life working the same 1,000-acre farm. Unlike the sprawling corporate-owned operations that had taken over much of the industry, Collins Farm remained a family-run legacy, serving both the local community and the military for 3 generations. The land had been in his family for over a century, and Henry took immense pride in keeping it running the way his father and grandfather had before him. For the past 30 years, Henry maintained a special landing zone in his south field, just like his father had done before him. It wasn't anything fancy, just a carefully cleared stretch of land marked with faded but sturdy guideposts. Packed dirt firm enough to handle the weight of a helicopter, it provided an essential training site for military helicopters from an airbase 2 states away, offering pilots a safe, reliable location to practice takeoffs, landings, and night maneuvers. Everyone in the area knew Collins Farm, but the pilots knew it even better. Whenever young crews needed night training, Henry stayed up late, methodically setting out the landing markers, rows of portable lights and old fuel barrels painted with reflective strips to help guide them in safely. Even in the dead of winter, when bitter winds howled across the open fields, Henry would be out there, bundled in his old canvas jacket, ensuring everything was in place. His wife, Eleanor, played just as big a role in the tradition. While Henry worked the field, she kept the farmhouse kitchen warm and inviting. Long training nights often meant exhausted crews stopping by for a brief rest, and Eleanor always had a fresh pot of coffee brewing, sandwiches stacked on the table, and a few extra blankets ready. "Can't have our boys training on empty stomachs," she'd say with a knowing smile. Some of those young men barely looked old enough to shave, but they were pilots in training, and she made sure they were taken care of. Even during peak harvest season, when every available acre was valuable, Henry made sure to keep that field clear. He could have easily planted a few more rows of corn or expanded his pastures, but for him, military readiness took priority. It wasn't just a farm, it was a commitment, a quiet but unwavering service to those who served. For 40 years, Henry never had issues with the county. His farm had been more than just land, it was a symbol of service, a piece of the country that played a small but crucial role in preparing military pilots for duty. But that all changed last year when Novatech, a billion-dollar Silicon Valley developer, set its sights on the area. Novatech wasn't just another company. It was a tech giant, a powerhouse in artificial intelligence and aerospace automation. They promised cutting-edge innovation, sleek office towers, and thousands of high-paying jobs. To them, this land wasn't history, it was an untapped resource, the perfect location for their new East Coast research campus. And Henry's farm was standing in the way. The executives came dressed in expensive suits with their rehearsed smiles and polished offers. "We're offering well above market value," they told him, sliding papers across the table. "Think of your future. Think of your family. It's an opportunity of a lifetime." But no amount of money could replace what Henry had built. This wasn't just property. It was a vital training ground that had prepared countless pilots for real-world combat. For 3 generations, Collins Farm had been an unofficial but essential extension of military readiness. The South Field had given young aviators a place to train under real conditions, the kind they'd later face in war zones. Some of those very pilots had gone on to serve in every major conflict since Desert Storm. Some had flown missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and beyond. And now, the place that helped shape them, the land where they had learned, trained, and found their courage, was being erased with the stroke of a pen. Sitting at his kitchen table, Henry stared at the final eviction notice, the bold red letters stamped across the top like a death sentence. After 50 years of dedication, Collins Farm was just days away from becoming another construction site. His father had protected these fields through the Cold War. His grandfather had started the tradition back in World War II. 3 generations had kept this land going, not just as a farm, but as a place of service. A small but steady hand supporting the military. And now a handful of developers were doing what war itself never could, wiping it all away with paperwork and money. One by one, Henry watched as his neighbors caved under the pressure. The Mitchell family, whose land had served as a crucial resting spot for helicopter crews on long-distance training runs, had given in months ago. Their once lively property, where pilots used to swap stories over sandwiches and coffee, now sat empty, marked only by a "sold" sign. The Parkers held out longer, but desperation finally caught up with them. Their 200-acre stretch had provided an emergency landing zone for pilots in distress. How many lives had been saved there over the years? But that history didn't pay the bills. Last week, they signed over their deed, forced to walk away from land that had been in their family for generations. Henry had seen Mitchell shaking his head outside the post office just yesterday. "Didn't have a choice," he muttered, "but damn, it feels like giving up." Henry knew exactly what he meant. Every night he sat with Eleanor at their kitchen table, staring at the latest offer. It was always higher than the last, a price designed to make surrender easier. The numbers on the page could solve all their problems. Wipe out debt, secure their future, maybe even let them retire in comfort. But at what cost? "I just don't get it," Henry said, rubbing his temples. 50 years of service to our country, and it means nothing? Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed his hand. She had always been his rock, the one who kept faith when things got tough. But even now, in her eyes, he could see the painful truth he already knew. Time was running out. That afternoon, with shaking hands, Henry hammered a sign into the ground. Notice: Military Training Zone closing. Closing farm, serving our forces since 1943. Writing those words made everything feel final, like he was saying goodbye to something bigger than himself. But underneath, he added one last message: "Thank you for 50 years of service to our country." For the first time in decades, he didn't call the base to confirm the next training schedule. He didn't check the weather reports or inspect the field for debris. He just kept up his routine, maintaining the field as he always had, out of habit, out of duty. But people could tell something was wrong. His shoulders slumped when he set out the landing lights. His voice cracked over the radio when he gave coordinates to incoming helicopters. He didn't linger by the field, waiting for pilots to wave as they passed. Then, one evening, a young reporter showed up at the farm. She was barely out of college, her press badge clipped to a denim jacket, a camera bag slung over her shoulder. She introduced herself as Claire Reynolds, a freelance journalist covering local stories. "I heard about the sign," she said, holding up her phone, where a blurry photo had been circulating online. "I'd love to hear your story." Henry hesitated. He wasn't much for talking to reporters. He'd seen too many stories twist the truth. But something about Claire reminded him of the young recruits who used to train here. Wide-eyed, eager to learn. So he invited her inside, poured 2 cups of coffee, and told her everything. He spoke about his grandfather, who first opened the land to pilots during World War II when the country was desperate for training grounds. He told her about his father, who kept the tradition alive through Korea and Vietnam, setting out landing markers with a lantern in one hand and a radio in the other. When Henry took over, he never questioned whether to continue. The base needed a safe place for low-visibility landings, and Collins Farm was the perfect spot. "They'd come in low," he said, his fingers tracing invisible flight paths on the table, "learning to touch down in rough conditions, just like they would in a combat zone." Claire scribbled furiously in her notebook, occasionally glancing up to ask a question. "Did the military compensate you for using the land?" Henry chuckled. "No, ma'am. We never asked for a dime." She frowned. "Then why keep doing it?" He thought for a moment, looking out the window toward the field. "Because it mattered." Claire set down her pen. "And now? Why are you stopping?" Henry exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "I don't want to. But Novatech wants this land, and they've got the county in their pocket." He gestured toward the eviction notice still sitting on the table. "Once they take it, that field's gone. No more training. No more pilots landing here. Just another office park." Claire was silent for a long time. Then she lifted her camera. "Mind if I take a few photos?" Henry nodded. He didn't expect much from the interview. Just another article about how progress always wins. But he was wrong. The story took off like wildfire. A photo of Henry's weathered sign, Bold letters announcing the end of an era spread through military circles. It started with a few local veterans who had trained at Collins Farm, reminiscing about night landing drills and emergency procedures. Then it reached active duty pilots stationed across the country. One after another, they shared their memories. Their first nerve-wracking touch-and-go landing on Henry's Field. The nights spent reviewing maps under the dim glow of flashlights. The warm sandwiches Eleanor always had waiting for them after long training sessions. This place made me the pilot I am today. I still remember Henry out there with his radio, guiding us in. 5 decades of military training gone just like that. The message spread fast, first through private groups, then onto public platforms. Veterans, service members, and military families began tagging officials, demanding answers. News stations picked up the story. Even local radio hosts, usually talking about small-town politics and weekend festivals, were suddenly discussing Collins Farm. Then Henry's phone rang. It was the old landline mounted on the kitchen wall, the same one he'd had for 30 years. His daughter had begged him 100 times to replace it with a cell, but he never saw the point. He almost didn't answer. Probably another reporter, or worse, a developer trying to make another offer. He picked up. "Mr. Collins, please hold for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs." Henry nearly dropped the receiver. This had to be a joke, some prank call. But then another voice came on, calm, authoritative. "Mr. Collins, I saw the article about your farm. Tell me about it." Henry wasn't sure what that meant yet. But for the first time in weeks, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. For the next 20 minutes, Henry told his story, not about politics, but about service, about late nights guiding helicopters in, about watching young pilots become seasoned aviators, about honoring a tradition his family had upheld for generations. The chairman listened, then finally said, "We can't afford to lose training grounds like yours. Give me 24 hours. Henry's hands trembled as he hung up. He turned to Eleanor, his voice barely steady. "Eleanor, you won't believe who just called." She rushed in. "Henry, what is it?" He shook his head, still in shock. "The chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He saw our story. He wants to help." Eleanor burst into tears. After all the sleepless nights, after watching Henry fight so hard, finally someone was listening. The next morning, as Henry finished his chores, the sky filled with the sound of rotor blades. An Apache helicopter appeared over the trees, followed by 3 Blackhawks. These weren't training crews. These were Pentagon aircraft. As the helicopters touched down, 2 generals stepped out, briefcases in hand. Henry's heart pounded. He knew this was it. "Mr. Collins," one of them said, flashing his credentials, "we're here to make sure your farm stays exactly where it belongs, serving the United States military." For the next hour, they sat at Henry's kitchen table, Eleanor pouring coffee as the generals explained the plan. The military would officially lease the training zones, making it impossible for developers to touch them. Collins Farm would be permanently protected, ensuring future generations of pilots could train there just as before. "Sign here," the general said. "This guarantees your farm's legacy." Henry's hands shook as he signed. After months of fighting, it felt unreal. As the generals packed up, one of them turned back. "The chairman wanted us to tell you something," he said. "Some things are worth more than money. Supporting our military is one of them." That same day, the generals paid a visit to Novatech's headquarters. The executives had been riding high, confident in their expansion plans. Their legal teams had assured them that everything was in order, that no one, especially not a few aging farmers, could stand in their way. But when the military officials walked into their sleek, glass-walled boardroom, their confidence vanished. "But our development plans," one of them started, scrambling for control of the conversation. The general cut him off with a steady, unshakable voice. It had been overridden by national security interests. Silence. The room full of suits suddenly realized what had just happened. Their contracts, their acquisitions, their ambitious blueprints, none of it mattered anymore. The United States military had spoken. Within hours, every threatened farm was protected. The Mitchells, who had spent restless nights regretting their decision to sell, received the news first. When the call came, Mr. Mitchell stood in stunned silence, phone to his ear, before finally whispering, "They saved us." His wife burst into tears, covering her mouth in disbelief. For weeks they had been forced to imagine their family's century-old land torn apart by bulldozers. Now it was theirs again. The Parkers were next. Their emergency landing zone had been used for decades, but like Henry, they had felt powerless against Novatech's money. Mr. Parker, who had once served as a mechanic in the Air Force, hadn't wanted to give up the land, but he also hadn't seen another choice. When the military called to inform them that the development plans had been scrapped, he let out a shaky laugh. "Guess they didn't forget about us after all," he said, gripping his wife's hand. Word spread fast. Neighbors who had resigned themselves to losing their land stood on their porches, letting out sighs of relief. Flags were raised a little higher that afternoon. The same training grounds that had shaped pilots for generations would remain untouched, standing firm against the tide of progress that had threatened to erase them. Collins Farm still stands today. Henry still maintains the landing zones, now with his grandson Jacob by his side. Training schedules are busier than ever, and Eleanor still makes sure every crew gets coffee and sandwiches, just like always. Henry keeps that old "closing notice" sign in his barn. When people ask about the day the chairman called, he just smiles, because some stories don't need retelling. You just need to look up and watch the helicopters fly. They tried to take everything, but some legacies can't be erased, because in the end, true wealth isn't measured in land or money, but in the lives we touch and the values we uphold. And those who stand for what's right will always leave a lasting mark. If this story inspired you, tap like and subscribe. Share one word in the comments that sums up how it made you feel. Until next time, stay strong and stand for what matters.